Welcome to Top of Mind, the show where we talk to real estate industry insiders and experts about the biggest trends impacting the market today. Enjoy the show.
Mike Simonsen here. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the Top of Mind podcast. This is where I talk to the smartest leaders, thinkers, doers in the real estate and related industries. For a few years now, we've been sharing our latest market data every week in a weekly video series. With the Top of Mind podcast, we are looking to add context to the discussion about what's happening in the market from leaders in the industry. Each week, Altos Research tracks every home for sale in the country, all the pricing, all the supply and demand, all the changes in that data, and we make it available to you before you see it in the traditional channels. People desperately need to know what's going on in housing right now. It was so hot and so competitive, and the landscape has just changed dramatically. And so when people ask me, Mike, can I get data for local market? The answer is yes. Visit altosresearch.com, book free consultation with our team. We can dive into local data for you and for your business. But really, we're here today to talk to my guest. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce today Clark Woodward. Clark is the founder, CEO of RedZone. RedZone is the leading expert on wildfire analytics and the impact of wildfires on homes and businesses. RedZone aggregates natural disaster response data and provides a platform for companies to easily understand and develop appropriate response to protect their assets. Clark is a firefighter, a data scientist, and an entrepreneur, and it's the perfect combination to tackle this really incredibly important topic and timely issue. So, Clark, thanks for joining me today. I got so much we want to cover. Wildfire in the American West, and the related topics of climate change and all of the risks that are around us. I can't wait to dive in.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, it's awesome to be here. And I'm really excited for the opportunity to talk to you about housing, which is kind of an area that we don't necessarily get to explore here at RedZone. So this is a really fascinating topic for me.
Awesome. Terrific. Well, that's a great place to start. So I love that. I'm interested about RedZone and about you, and obviously in particular that you're a firefighter and a data scientist. Tell me how that happens, and then tell us about RedZone a little bit.
Sure. So, I got into this business because I lived in it. I grew up and moved out to Boulder, Colorado. I was living in the hills in an area with super high wildfire risk, and I became a firefighter. I became a volunteer, and my education, I'm a map guy. I'm a map dork. I was building maps for the U.S. Geological Survey. And my fire chief said, "Hey, Clark, can you make us a map of all of the homes in our district?" So I built some software to do that. And that software became popular among fire departments. And then big companies started coming to us. And, it's how we got into insurance, is that people wanted to know where their homes were and what the risk was in the surrounding areas. So, we really evolved through the need of our own local fire district. And we've turned it into, a business now for 22 years.
Amazing. And so when you look at the map, you're plotting homes on the map, you are assessing fire risk of those homes for the insurance companies or mortgage companies or something like that?
Yeah. So you can think of an insurance company having homes all across the West. What do they need to know? Well, the first thing they need to know is which homes are exposed to wildfire. How bad would it be should one occur? And how frequent would they expect, those fires to happen? So we provide those analytics along with their concentration of risk. What could a really bad day look like for an insurance company to help them prepare for these disasters? But one of the cool things that we do is that we also provide real-time monitoring. So we are on top of every wildfire that happens across the US. And we tell our customers when they're affected by a wildfire, and then often what they can do about it. So they might communicate out to their customers. Maybe they send an email with a map of every person's home and their distance to the wildfire to help them understand, how the event is really impacting the individual person. You often hear that insurance companies are sending private fire trucks to help mitigate homes right in the head of a wildfire. It's really common in California, where they'll try to save those homes in the event that we have a fire on the ground. That's often RedZone's technology putting those firefighters at the home for an insurance company, and so it's kind of one of the unique and really exciting products that we offer.
That's amazing. So, because obviously it's a lot cheaper to go hire a private fire truck and go clear stop some fire right before it gets to the neighborhood where you have exposure.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head right there. What we do is we get a fire truck to help that home get prepped for the fire to arrive. We're moving furniture, we're spraying fire retardant, we're closing windows, and then when the fire arrives, we're out of there. And then it's the job of the fire departments to fight that fire. So we're there to complement and really improve the chances of that home surviving the event.
That's amazing. Can individual consumers go to you and do that, book that?
We work sometimes with smaller HOAs, communities, but it's really a game of having, not enough resources across a big geographic area.
Yeah.
So, it's best to have somebody like an insurance company who can move those resources around the state to where they're needed. You have to be there at the right time.
Uh-huh. Man, that is so fascinating. Man, we have so much to talk about. So before we dive in, I'm really interested in the technology and the data that you're using. But before we dive into that, let's talk a little more broadly. One of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is I live in California. I have a house in the mountains, and it seems like the world is the fire risk in general, but natural disasters more broadly are increasing in impact. And so sometimes I wonder, is it all just recency bias? I just remember the most recent ones and therefore I think it's a lot? Or is there data that says, yeah, Mike, the fires are getting worse and they're going to keep getting worse? What do we know? What does the data say?
Well, clearly the data says that climate is changing. And, what we're seeing is warmer waters. And probably most importantly, across the US, we're seeing windier events. So we're having larger wildfires that are growing, unabated in this extreme weather. So the average wildfire size has increased dramatically in the last 2 decades. So those large wildfires, are the ones that can become the most damaging because they're really hard to fight. Individual firefighters, the planes in the skies, they can't stop 100,000 acre wildfire.
Right.
So we're seeing bigger fires that are more intense. And, at the same time, we're seeing more and more people living in the communities. We've had, in the last 10 years, something like 6 million new homes in the wildland urban interface, accounting for like 20 million people living. So we are encountering these large wildfires because as a society, we're living in those areas where they're happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you said 6 million new homes that are at that wildfire, the wilderness suburban edge, the exurbs that keep inexorably driving further out.
Yeah, we call it the wildland urban interface.
Wildland urban interface. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have policy opinions on that? Should we stop or should we do something dramatic like dramatically different building codes? What do you think from your perspective of the fires are getting worse and the people are getting more exposed? What do we do?
Well, with all complex problems, there isn't a single solution. If there was a single solution, we would have done it. and we'd be, on our way to recovery.
Yeah.
But realistically, we have to approach this from both the individual structure as well as the forest health. If we started with forest health, we can think of, the last 70 years of fire suppression, where we've made every effort, from the Forest Service and from the BLM and our other firefighting agencies to put every wildfire out. So what we've ended up with forests that have not burned in 100 years. And naturally, they should expect to have had wildfires, 2 or 3 times a century, which reduces the amount of fuel we have in the forest. So now we have these forests that are over accumulated. And when they burn with a greater intensity, which makes them larger and harder to put out, and therefore more destructive. So from a policy perspective, we need to attack the forest health as a policy nationally. So we need to be putting, prescribed fire down on the ground, be burning forests under our own terms, where we can, to some degree, control the intensity of that wildfire and reduce that fuel. That's something we're seeing in the Inflation Reduction Act. There's, $450 million toward forest health and climate resilience. And that is a step in the right direction. So from a policy standpoint, we need more of that. And we need more of that long-term thinking where we're, thinking about our forests over the next century and making them safer and healthier, for us to coexist.
Yeah, that's so that makes a lot of sense, obviously. And it makes a lot of intuitive sense about, forests need to burn. And so 50 or more years ago, we were still in active suppression mode. Are we more in, like, is it more commonly accepted that we need to be in prescribed burn mode more frequently? Or is there still a camp that's resisting that very dramatically?
Oh, I mean, there's definitely camps that are resisting it. It's a hard decision to make to let a fire burn, in particular, because there's a higher chance that you're going to lose homes. And so you're putting people at risk knowingly and willingly. And that's an incredibly hard decision for, a society to make. But it is, they're going to burn whether we want them to or not. So
right.
If we can control them, there's a growing movement to, try to keep those fires that are allowed to burn and, let them go with, an understanding that it's toward the greater good, even though it puts some individuals at risk.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So yeah, it's like, you could imagine, especially in a place like California, where you get like one homeowner that says you can't burn here, and it stops the whole process from happening and regaining health.
Yeah. I mean, air quality is often a big target of prescribed burning. You can't burn if you're going to negatively impact the air quality and therefore put those citizens with respiratory issues and, problems at risk. And so it is, it's a complex dance to host a prescribed fire in your community for sure.
Wow. Yeah. The so many constituents on that. That's really fascinating. Are there places that we're currently building that you're like, man, that is nuts? We should not be doing that. Is there any place that's obvious that is obviously happening from where we are now? It maybe feels okay, but the trends say that in 15 years they're all screwed. Is there anything like that you can see?
Yeah, I mean, I think across the West, we could say that in high risk areas, it's insane to be building flammable homes. So, there are high risk areas where a home that is properly constructed with, fire resistant materials, with good space around the home that would not have this kind of fire intensity. That is a reasonably responsible place to build a home. But we see these, millions of homes that are going up in high risk areas that are difficult to protect. They're dangerous for firefighters to be there. And, they're made of combustible materials. And that's hard to swallow. And, it's really a factor of the fact that that's where land is cheap. Housing is really expensive. And it's completely understandable that people do it, because that gives them the opportunity to be a homeowner, where they may not be able to buy in downtown LA, but they can buy on the outskirts. They can buy in those higher risk areas where land is cheaper.
And the construction is cheaper when you're putting up sticks too, right?
Right.
While we're on that topic of construction, are there like what does a less flammable house look like? Like, what are we building? What should we be building from? Is it like concrete cladding, kind of those kind of things, or what does it look like?
Well, I think this is an exciting part of the market right now, because there's been a lot of research, and there's finally been some data that helps us really validate what makes a home survive. And the way that I like to think about it is that when we think of a wildfire, we often think of it as the big flames that we see on TV because our eyes are drawn to it. But in reality, the real driver of home loss is the embers that precede that wildfire. So a fire is burning through the forest, and it's lifting leaves and pine cones and all sorts of material. And when it approaches your home, you have a billion embers up against your house. So when you think of home hardening, you're really protecting yourself, against those embers. So, we might start with the construction type. A metal roof is better than an asphalt roof, which is light years better than, a wood roof.
Yeah.
We know stucco is better than wood siding. But, the other things we got to think about is like, where are all those embers going to go? Can they get into my eaves? Can they get into my vents? Can they get under the house? And so when we harden that house and we walk around, we think of all those places that, would help that home survive. It's going to be to survive that ember shower. And, you have to think about the surrounding forest. If you have flames up against your house, your probability of survival will go way, way down. So removing the fuel, the grass from around your house, mowing, limbing, and removing trees, even selectively from around the house, will keep those flames from getting close. And then you've got to survive that ember shower. And that's really a sort of a 1-2 punch of home hardening is defensible space and, the materials and the ember.
Yeah, no, the community that I have my home in is really aggressive about defensible space. And seems to me it's probably a change from even maybe 20 years ago. They were probably doing the opposite of that. Like, you can't cut down trees. And, they're probably like, I don't know when that transition happened, but my guess is that, 20 or 25 years ago, they were like still preventing people from that. And they've moved into a really aggressive defensible space, with citations on homes where you haven't done the upkeep. Is that true in most of the risky areas around there? Like, are the local, like the authorities, that whether it's county or whatever, like, are they starting to be more enlightened and working harder on this?
Well, I think there's an acknowledgement to the scale of the problem, no doubt about it. But I think you have to remember the history of the West was a history of independent, free spirit, and the ability for you to live, or a person to live, and have no one tell them what to do. So that has carried forward to a lack of building codes, which have enabled very flammable homes to be built. And so it is very difficult. It's both politically difficult and from a regulatory standpoint, difficult to implement building codes. And that only really addresses new home construction. So, we've seen in California where, after building codes were required, that the home losses of homes built after the 1970s has been, extremely limited compared to those that were built, prior to the implementation of building codes. So we know building codes have a positive impact.
Yeah. Wow. Right. And so yes, the history of the American West is like self-reinforcing on that topic, I suppose. Like
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, it's expensive to retrofit a home. So you have a home that is flammable. As a homeowner, you acknowledge the problem. Now, what do you do? To replace your siding, to replace your roof, to make fundamental changes to your home is really expensive. And, I think where we're seeing success is in programs, either state or federally, where the federal government will, provide you, or, you can get a low cost loan to do some of that retrofitting.
Oh, is that right?
That's a place where I think there's a lot of promise for homeowners to, who have the intent to do the right thing, is to give them the ability, the financial ability to then go execute and change the combustibility of their home.
Interesting. That's encouraging. Like it's like, yeah, you got to put a new roof on that thing. That's tens of thousands of dollars. And I can like very easy to put off that decision and hope that it makes it one more year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So having a federal program for doing that that's really, really fascinating. You might get the same kind of questions I do, which is on people are like because I do analyze the real estate market. People ask me all the time, should I buy a house now? Is it a good time to buy a house? Should I buy a house in Tahoe? And one of the things that I discuss, especially when they're talking about buying, in Northern California, it's like I don't know, given the direction of fires and in the smoke in the state now, like if is that something I'd recommend? Is that, and like I remember, like I've been in San Francisco for 25 years and almost, and I, in the first couple of decades, maybe smoke one time, and now smoke every year. Like it seemed like in San Francisco. And so when do people ask you, like, should I be doing this? Or, or what do you say when they ask?
So what I say is that you got to go into it with eyes wide open. You have to understand the risk that you're taking on if you're buying a house in Tahoe. There's an acceptance of responsibility that you may lose that home to a wildfire. And, whether that is your ability to actually properly mitigate that home, to accept that insurance is going to be expensive if it's even, available. So buying a house that you can truly afford and perhaps afford to lose, is an important decision to make when you're buying a house in California or kind of anywhere in the West.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, this year has been pretty quiet. We had a couple of years of really hard, wildfire seasons with lots of smoke and lots of losses. And, for whatever reason, this year has been reasonably quiet, across the West. And so, some years will be bad, and we need to remember those and not forget them, even when we have these quieter years.
Yeah, we had one in Northern California, one big one for a few weeks that really smoked out much of the state this year, which is definitely lower than recent years. I think maybe it was last spring. It was in Boulder where it was like there's still snow on the ground, but the grass was burning. Like there was some kind of phenomenon like that happening. Is that?
Yeah. You remember it correctly. You didn't get the season correct. It was between Christmas and New Year's. So December 29th. And we had it was extremely dry. There was not a lot of snow on the ground, but it was cold and it was really windy. And a fire started, just east of the mountains and pushed miles across these grasslands, and then ignited the edge of the community, and led to losses of, more than 1,000 homes in a matter of hours. Yeah, and that's, I think that's the type of event, as I was mentioning before. It's about the wind, those extreme winds, those hurricane force winds that just make, fire impossible to fight, but also produce those embers that were carried, well ahead of the fire. And then when the homes started to burn, those, the embers from those homes of all of that combustible stuff in your house started falling on the neighbors, and leading to that structure to structure ignition that was really, was the driver of that, just phenomenal numbers of losses.
That's incredible. And is that unique to have happened in December, a fire like that?
No, I mean, unfortunately not. It was unique to have that density of the numbers of losses. But, we can think of all of these fires. I mean, we're under red flag warning, today, and it's chilly, but it's dry and it's windy. And, that's where the risk comes from.
Yeah, we're here. We are. It's late October, and we have the same in Tahoe. It is pure fire conditions, and it's like, it could snow next week and calm that down, but man, it seems late in the year to be red flag.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can think of it. You have these weather patterns that come across the West, and they're pushing ahead of a cold front, these extreme winds. So you'll get 100-mile-an-hour winds, and then 12 hours later or 4 hours later, you'll get 6 inches of snow. And the two are, intricately connected, because that weather pattern is causing the wind. And on the backside of it is the snow.
Yeah, for sure. So let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about the RedZone and like the technology and like what data goes into the risk calculations. What can you measure for a property level?
Well, you start with data that is mostly geographic and topographic. So it's the slope, the aspect, the fuel type, how tall is it? How dense is it? And, you combine that with weather data. What is the worst case scenario of weather in a particular area? And if you combine those two, you can get a sense of a measure of the severity of that wildfire. How intense would it be? How large would it grow? And that gives you a good understanding of the likelihood of loss should a fire occur at that property. But then you really need to look at the frequency. So we use millions and millions of scenarios where models, start wildfires and see if they grow to a large size. And so we have, 100 million simulations in our database that then allow us to look at the probability in a given year. What's the likelihood of having a wildfire at this house or that house?
Is that like a Monte Carlo simulation? Is that like that kind of probability that you're doing?
Exactly. And, you can think of, there are some areas that are high elevation, and, the fire season is much shorter. You've got snow on the ground, you've got, moist weather. And what it really ends up with is that you have a lower probability of actually having a fire. If you look at the Front Range of Colorado, there's a very high probability because you have lots of high fire weather days. And so that's what that frequency is helping us measure, is to really tease out, which homes are more likely to burn in a given year, or which regions are more likely to burn in a given year.
Yeah. So when we're looking at a community, we know that things like the house built on the ridge, at the top of the ridge, is at more risk than down in the valley. Is that like a common assumption about like the fire burns up the hill? And
yeah, you're looking at clear like fire mechanics. What, how quickly can a fire build its intensity as it comes up a slope, and then, arrives at your home at the top of the slope with a greater intensity than it would if you were at the bottom and it was, just beginning to kind of come up that hill.
Yeah. So of those variables, are the things like, dude, you built your house at the top of the hill versus the bottom. Is that more important versus, or is it more like like, look, man, this is the Front Range of Colorado. It's going to burn. Like which of those, how do you weight those in the probabilities, or how do they end up falling out?
So I would say that it's more of the latter. Understanding where large fires have occurred is probably more important than where you are, on the slope.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an uncertainty to wildfire because you may lose your home, due to those embers that come from a fairly small wildfire, but have a place to land at your home, and that's what's going to cause your loss, or create a more certain loss.
Yeah. Huh. That's really fascinating. Are there advances in the data science that are making it more useful or more able to prevent loss?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all sorts of technology coming on the market. Some of the exciting things that we see are cameras being really positioned across the states, and look at California. We've got access to cameras that pretty much pick up the vast majority of wildfires, and if you can detect them and really understand that you've got a fire burning and put resources on that fire and keep it small, you have solved part of the problem. So that initial attack, that really effective initial attack with all of the resources that you have, makes a material impact on losses.
That's cool. So the cameras that are out there, they're on like cell towers or whatever that are sitting out there, and they can scan over. And so those are detecting fires before they were detected previously. Is that true?
Yeah, you've got people, your people and artificial intelligence that takes those camera images, can detect what a smoke column looks like, and really determine, okay, we've got a fire. We're going to, alert the authorities. We're going to put aircraft in the air, firefighters on their way. And the faster you can get there, you keep it small, then you've done something good with technology.
That's fascinating. My brother was a smoke jumper for a bunch of years in the 90s and out of Montana, and so that's they flying them out there, one or two guys to a little column of smoke somewhere in the middle of the mountains, and parachute them in, and so are those smoke jumpers getting to fires faster now?
I would say, I mean, there's fire detection in satellites. There's fire detection in aircraft. There's a lot of military technology that's now being used for civilian purposes in fire. So there's a number of platforms that are helping to detect those fires, and combine that with severity models where you could say, I have 100 fires that are burning right now. Which ones have the recipe to become a big fire? And then you can allocate your resources to the right place. And as we coordinate better across the agencies, we can get those resources there faster. And
make better decisions. I could imagine that in previous decades, the decision about which of those fires to go drop the smoke jumpers onto was, some manager's gut feel. Somebody who'd been there for 40 years, and they were like, that one's going to burn, go to that one. And now we have other ways to confirm that or schedule or prioritize.
Exactly. Yep.
Super cool. Are there other technologies that you're like jazzed about that are going to help us through this transition of climate risk?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from an insurance perspective that what we call insurtech, it is, the technology that insurance companies have available to them is just exploding. And, traditionally insurance companies would build their own systems, these megalith systems that would, exist for years and years and be really hard to connect with. But insurtech has allowed them to be more nimble, that they're combining information. I want to make an underwriting decision, maybe I'm going to incorporate weather data, and I'm going to incorporate, the fuel in the surrounding area, and I'm just a more nuanced decision about a home. And probably what's most exciting to me is that it's the availability of mitigation information. What has this homeowner done to make their home more survivable in an event? And if you can incorporate that into a decision that, is based in science, and you can do that in a way that's acceptable to the regulatory environment, having this detail really allows an insurance company to make an appropriate decision for the business and for the homeowner. And I think that's probably the most exciting technology that we see.
That's great. And I suppose that's a positive feedback loop, in that if I can tell my insurance company I'm doing good work, and then that brings back either cost benefits or even like you're not getting dropped, like that encourages me to do good work on making my home defensible.
Yeah. I mean, even this week, we saw the California Department of Insurance make regulatory changes, requiring insurance companies to take some of this information into account when they make a decision on eligibility or on your renewal. So it's kind of the toe in the water on, incorporating mitigation and a homeowner's good efforts into that decision-making process.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is it a general trend that the regulators are doing better?
Well, I mean, that's a dangerous question to answer. The regulators are there to protect the consumer and ensure fair practices and access to insurance and reasonable price rates for homes. So as our climate changes and as our fire risk has increased exponentially, we've definitely had that conflict between the insurers and the regulators, which has led the regulators to not change their stance much. And maybe what we saw this week was a little bit of a move toward being more flexible and incorporating some more detailed analytical data into that decision making, and allowing those insurance companies to be more somewhat creative in incorporating more real-time data about the home itself into that decision making. And I think it's a positive move that addressing a multifaceted problem.
Yeah, when I first bought my house in Tahoe, I remember we're going to close on the mortgage, and the lender said, "Okay, where's your insurance?" And I called my insurance company that I'd had forever, and they said, "Nope, we won't." And I had no idea that they wouldn't insure my home, and it took me a bunch of calls, and we finally found one. And I'm now on a state of California plan that is basically a backstop, because essentially nobody's going to insure that house. And I had no idea that was coming. So now I've got like state of California plan and a supplemental plan, and trying to do all these things. And as a consumer, I bought that house. I had no idea.
Yeah. I mean, you're not alone. There are, millions of Californians and millions of residents around the West that are experiencing that same thing. And we're seeing, one of the concepts I think a lot of people aren't aware of is the reinsurance market, primarily out of London, is where insurance companies buy insurance on their insurance, on their assets. And, those costs have risen dramatically in the last 2 years, after the fires of, 2021 and through 2019 through 2021, reinsurance became much more, expensive and limited. And that cost, is definitely not passed down to the consumer, but incorporated into the decision-making of an insurance company. So they are non-renewing. It may be because they can't get the insurance, on the asset. And so people don't often understand that there's a whole market sort of behind the insurance company's decision, and it's really impacting the individual consumer today.
Yeah, we project all the nefarious evil insurance company decisions when it can be very straightforward. A couple of those factors, they've got a market that they have to deal with, but they also have a regulatory environment that says what they can charge, even if they assess the risk to be higher, they can't account for it, and then therefore they say, therefore we can't insure in this state. Like we can't make it happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Fascinating. So we've been talking about fire and the climate risk, especially in the American West, about that is impacting the growth in wildfires and the risk from wildfires. Do you guys look at other climate risks, other things that are changing around the country, around the world, that turn into disasters that are analogous to fires in the American West? Like we just had Hurricane Ian in Florida. Do you guys look at that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do from a couple of different ways. One, RedZone as a company monitors hurricanes, earthquakes, other natural disasters, because part of our specialty is having that public safety background and helping a company unravel all the messy data about a disaster and make a business decision, like a fast business decision. And so we do this in Japan, and we do it in typhoons and earthquakes. And so, the model that we provide and the expertise, the human intelligence aspect, is applicable. But I think we're in Hurricane Ian, we saw some real success stories about the mitigation and hardening. And, we saw some communities that were built on, with solar panels, their infrastructure was underground. The community was built to survive an event, and they survived unscathed. And I think that's so heartening when we think of the scale of the challenge that we have in the West, is that we can build communities that can survive these fires. But we just have to do it, with a long-term vision and the resources to make that investment. So we can do it right. And we saw it in Hurricane Ian, and I think it's a good lesson for us to take as we make these hard decisions in the West, is that, we're seeing examples of it working. And that was heartening.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I didn't realize it. So there were real success stories about how to build a hurricane-proof community. You're building on an island, right? In the hurricane path. So there were some good success stories there. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, neat. That's really great. Are there other things that we can be optimistic about? Like in that thing, like if you're looking forward, like we talk about climate risk and it's kind of a pessimistic bent. It's a little fearful. Are there other things that you see that we should be optimistic about, or that you're like optimistic trends that you see that are optimistic in the world?
Well, I think the availability of data is, from a personal standpoint, really, exciting to me. Is, homeowners just so often will do the good work and not receive the benefit. And I think that, 5 years ago, I would have said to a homeowner, in a very skeptical tone, that they're never going to see the benefit of it. I'm sorry that, the industry is not there. But today, I think, we're seeing those changes of data being used for better business decisions and, having that impact the homeowner. And I think that's really encouraging people to do that hard work. And so, that's what keeps me coming to work every day.
Really, that feel that real positive impact for the consumers.
Exactly.
That's cool. I love the comments about doing earthquake work in Japan. Are you doing down to the property level? Like, can you look at the maps and the fault lines and say, this guy's on a liquefaction zone and this guy's not, and therefore risks are? Like, do you have that level of analysis for earthquake work?
Yeah. So when we look at earthquakes, we're talking about the event. So say you have 1 million policies under your portfolio and a big event happens. We're going to categorize those, and those homes that are at the epicenter, are likely damaged. And an insurance company, if they know that, can just open a claim and start getting money out to that homeowner to, start to recover their life. So they don't have to visit it in Japan. They can just open the claim and start to pay you out. For those, homes that are on the outskirts, maybe that's where an insurance company takes their people and they send those people to visit those homes. And then all the way out the outer ring, maybe you just send them an email and ask the homeowner, have you experienced damage? And therefore, can we, reach out to you and get a claim started and help you recover and fix that damage? So what we're doing is we're helping people triage the problem quickly and, and act on it. And we're taking our lessons and our experience from public safety and applying it, to a commercial business where they don't necessarily have that expertise.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. It's so fascinating being in the growth industry of natural disasters.
Yeah, it's certainly not going away.
Wow, that's super, super cool. So are there things that we like, if you pay attention to the science, we know that climate risk, you can see the data about climate risk increasing. We can see the wind and the temperature changes. We can see hurricane frequency, those kinds of things. And so those are pretty well known. Are there trends that you see, especially things that we should think about as just homeowners in this world? Are there trends that you see that aren't being talked about enough? Are there risks? Are there things in the data?
I mean, to me, as a homeowner in the West, the thing that keeps me up at night is water, is the availability of water for my community. And to be honest, the West just feels parched. You look at our reservoirs, the reservoirs that are feeding California are drying up. And so from an acute standpoint, I think water is going to drive decisions on community development and housing as much as wildfire would. And so, I think that we're heading toward some tough decisions on who gets water and which community survives in the coming decades.
Yeah, that I am really with you on that. To a large degree, the story of the American West of the last 150 years is a story of water.
Exactly.
And we are in a dramatic change. Have you seen communities doing things well with water? Like I think, for example, San Diego's done some really good desalination investment and things like that. Have you seen other places making good, wise water decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cultural shift around how we use our water, whether it's on the agricultural front, on the residential front, as we see communities take a more xeriscaping approach where they're not, wasting water on things that are not fundamentally needed. I think that's really important.
Right. So we make some hard decisions on swimming pools and golf courses and almond farms.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Clark, this is really terrific. I could go for a long time. We're getting close to the top of our hour though. So, are there, one thing I love, do you publish much? Do you write like LinkedIn or anything on things you're seeing in the world? Do you get to write so that my listeners can go follow up and read some of your stuff? Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, we've got a weekly blog that comes out that is, educational, on the topic of wildfire, and includes current events. So, if people are interested, they can go to our website, www.redzone.co, and sign up for our blog, and they'll get information each week.
The blog on redzone.co.
You got it.
Awesome. That's great. Clark, a real pleasure. This is exactly where I wanted to go and help understand about what we need to know about wildfires and climate risk in the world. I am encouraged by some of the things we talked about, and so that's useful to me. So I really appreciate your insights. Anything else we want to make sure we get out today?
No, I think it's always fascinating to talk about this, especially with a resident of the West. Somebody who lives and breathes it. And I think that's so important that this topic, affects you individually as well as, your customer base and the community at large. So
Yeah, it certainly does. I think about it a lot and about, where do I spend my future? I think about San Francisco proper is maybe one of the best insulated places from climate risk. It's cool and stuff, but it's the middle of October and I can tell it's a hot night in San Francisco because the coconut oil melts above 70 degrees in my kitchen, and we don't. There's no air conditioning in San Francisco, and so it's like that can happen in July, but when it happens in October, I'm starting to be a little suspect. And we had that this week. It's that big heat wave over the West, but mostly I feel insulated. But then that part of the world is not that big. We're like right in San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you feel about being in the mountains of Colorado in the next couple decades?
So, I mean, it feels dry and it feels hot, and it's snowing less. I worry about my kids. We live just outside of Aspen, and I grew up, skiing. We moved here to ski, and I'm worried about my children and their children being able to experience that, deep powder snow. I just don't think it's going to be around. The skiing industry is changing, and we're seeing that in our generation as the climate just creates less snow.
Yeah. The World Cup ski season starts in Banff, Canada, in like 2 weeks, and it was 85 degrees there this week. So we got a new territory in front of us, I suppose.
Yep, I would agree.
All right. Thanks, Clark. Thanks so much. I really, really appreciate it. All right, everybody. That's the Top of Mind podcast. I'm Mike Simonsen. Always visit us at altosresearch.com. Go to redzone.co for the blog to learn about wildfires and the topical interest of the news that's happening around fires in the country. And Clark, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike, for a fascinating hour.
Thanks for listening to Top of Mind. See you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.